Well, good evening, everybody. Glad you're here tonight. This is our fourth installment on Gideon and discovering our identity and purpose. I encourage you to grab your Bibles or your devices and open up to Judges chapter 6 and 7. That's where we're going to be tonight. Let me encourage you, be safe, be careful out there, do what you got to do to keep yourself in the right positions. Remember social distancing. Remember to wear your masks. We want to just simply do our part to keep each other safe. And so I encourage you to continue to do that. You know, one of the big points that we see coming out of the text, especially tonight, but in the whole story of Gideon, is the awesome patience of God. He has patiently pursued us. He tolerates our spiritual mood swings. He hasn't been unnerved when I take longer than I should to obey Him or believe Him or to trust in His guidance. Instead of swift justice, He has extended me mercy, offering me chance after chance, and no one else in the entire world ever deals with me so kindly and so patiently. That's how awesome this God is. So I definitely want to partner with Him. All right? With Gideon, that patience is highlighted or spotlighted by the need for confirmation from God about His identity and purpose. We're going to note or highlight three of them tonight, and here they are. Judges chapter 6. Verse 17, we see that Gideon, upon hearing his initial assignment, goes and prepares a meal of meat and bread and brings it back to the angel. In that same chapter, in verses 36, 37, we know this part with the wet fleece and the dry ground, and then the dry fleece and the wet ground. We know that part. But also in chapter 7, in verses 9 through 11, we see Gideon and Purah hearing from some Midianite soldiers in a tent about one of their dreams, and all three of those confirm Gideon's assignment. You know, I like signs, especially street signs. When I'm driving to a location that I've never been to before, I always appreciate every single indicator that tells me that I'm headed in the right direction. And each new marker builds confidence and my certainty. Just this week, Lisa and I were traveling back from Alabama from our son's wedding, and I haven't traveled that way very much. And here we are, we've got 12 hours coming back home, and almost immediately I take a wrong turn. Actually, I miss the turn, right? And so we're driving along, and I just kind of get this funny feeling. Maybe it's a dad feeling, right? You're going, hey, this isn't the road, I'm not comfortable with this. And so I start looking at the signs, the little highway signs, right, over there in the median, not in the median, on the side of the road. And I'm not seeing my highway number. 72 is not over there. And so I say, Lisa, look up on your phone, check her out. Sure enough, I'd missed it, right? I had totally missed it. 30 minutes out of our way, backtracking, we get back on the right way to where we're headed. So even if we're still on the fence a little bit about Gideon's need for confirmation again and again and again, I think we get it, because I want that. I want that too, don't you? And we could focus in this story on Gideon's potential weaknesses, couldn't we? But I think there are some great positive characteristics of God revealed here that we absolutely don't want to miss. God's knowledge of our weaknesses is an important factor. He knows that we're weak. He knows our areas of struggle, and yet He's still willing to deal with us. His ability to use Gideon's talents in spite of his weaknesses and ours. His ability to use us in spite of our weaknesses. That's awesome, right? God doesn't scold or rebuke Gideon for his lack of confidence, nor ignore Gideon's request for confirmation. He actually takes some steps to accommodate Gideon's hesitance, right? You know, typically we think that God deals with us the same way that we deal with other people. I'm sure you guys have read that book about the 5 love languages that actually kind of talks about this. It says that each and every one of us has a love language. And so when you marry somebody, the idea is that you're going to deposit in their love bank what they need to their specific love languages. Except here's the issue. Most of us have separate or different love languages. But the truth is, we typically give what we receive. And so if our spouse has a different love language than us, and I'm giving them what I would receive, you can see the potential conflict. And so that's the idea here. God doesn't deal with us the same way that we would deal with other people. And so since we might become frustrated then with a friend or a spouse who consistently is unsure or apprehensive, the thing is that we can expect God to feel a little bit differently about us in that area. And I want you guys to see this contrast. There is definitely a contrast between how Gideon thinks God feels about his need for confirmation and legitimately how God feels about the need for Gideon's confirmation. We see this contrast in chapter 6, verse 39. It says here that Gideon says to God, please don't let your anger burn against me. Please don't be mad at me, because this is actually the 4th time he's looking for some area of confirmation. He's thinking that God's going to be angry at him because that's the way he would act if someone was doing this to him. But God's patience, his mercy is everlasting, is awesome, is great, it never ends, right? And so God doesn't respond that way. He actually encourages and supports him. There in chapter 7, verses 9 through 11, it says there that he says, okay, if you're going to be afraid, I'm going to give you Purah, and you guys are going to go down, and he's going to be your servant, right? Man, how awesome is this, right? What we learn from God in this interaction with Gideon is that he will answer. He will first hear, and then answer in a reassuring way over and over and over again. He is patiently working through our weaknesses. So here's the big point, gang, right? God's relationship with Gideon is not an exception. It is an example. It's an example that reveals to us what we should expect in our relationship with him. We can count on this from him, right? Most of us have heard this phrase from the Old Testament, that God is slow to anger, but it's often coupled with this phrase, abounding in steadfast love. And it brings in this idea of support and grace and mercy, right? We don't typically think of those in authority as patient, though, do we? Powerful people can be most intolerant of other people's weaknesses. So God choosing to bear with us through our reservations or even our sins is sometimes a difficult concept for us to totally believe and to trust in. But unlike human power, God's power is partnered with his patience. In fact, his power enables him to exercise unbelievable restraint. That's how he shows his authority, not only in what he can do, but also what he chooses not to do. God's mercy, his grace, his patience is everlasting. And this is good news for you and me, because it means that your actions or inactions cannot stir God's impatience. It might stir his discipline, maybe, or his correction, or maybe some fatherly action, but not impatience. We cannot, let me put the emphasis on that. We can't do anything to weaken his divine long-suffering, because it's dependent upon his power, which is never going to weaken, and it's never going to run out. When God does choose to unleash his wrath or his judgment or his discipline, it's based on his own divine will, not some knee-jerk reaction born out of frustration, out of our actions, right? And we see some great examples of this when he deals with Nineveh, right? I advanced too quickly there. When he deals with Nineveh in Jonah chapter 3, when he deals with Noah in Genesis chapter 6, and then with the Israelites there in Numbers chapter 14, where he kind of says 3 or 4 times, how long am I going to put up with you guys, right? And so as we become more aware of how undeserving God's patience is, the natural outcome should be a deep desire to obey and to trust Him. We should never see His patience as an excuse to spiritually slack off or think, oh, God's cool with all this sort of stuff. I can do anything that I want to do, right? Our response should be to live thankful, expectant lives. And not only that, His gift of patience to us should compel us to want to give it to other people, right? So let's take a closer look at our text, okay? So Gideon needed assurance, so he wanted to make some deals. So let's check out Judges chapter 6, verses 17 and 18, all right? So Gideon says to God or the angel, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that it is you who speaks with me. Please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you." And he said, "I will stay till you return." So this is right after his very first assignment. And so you can kind of see Gideon here going, all right, if you're really who you say you are, and if you really mean what you're saying here about who I am and about who you are, wait right here. I'm going to go fix us a meal, right? And surprisingly, the angel of the Lord wasn't upset with Gideon's proposal of need for confirmation. He agrees to wait. He wanted to receive the gifts that Gideon would prepare. He cared about Gideon's gifts. He cares about your gifts and my gifts. Gideon's gifts were physical, tangible things. There was meat, there was bread, there was broth, but ours are tangible too, like money and time. But often our gifts are intangible, like talents and passions that He has given us to serve Him. So check out what happens next in the text, all right? Let's read verses 19 and 20. So Gideon went into his house and prepared a young goat and unleavened cakes from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and the broth he put in a pot, and brought them to him under the terebinth or the tree, and presented them. And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened cakes, and put them on this rock, and pour the broth over them." And he did so. Now check this out. We noticed 4 things about giving gifts to God. Gideon prepared the gift for the stranger. He presented it to him. Then the angel of the Lord asked him to put it down, and then the angel asked him to pour it out. Did you notice all that Gideon had to do there in verse 19? He killed a young goat by himself. He kneaded the dough and made bread. He whipped up the broth, and this was all done from scratch, right? It was an extravagantly sacrificial meal considering the state of Israel's deprivation at the time. It required time and effort and energy. This was truly a sacrifice. Many Christians don't want to start here. They balk at doing hard work involved in the preparation process. But we cannot expect God to use what we have not taken time to prepare. This is important, guys. You see, dedicating the time to hone your gift will help you be ready when He opens the opportunities before you. When I was with Dale Carnegie, we talked about this a lot, about being prepared for the moment to come, right? We know when a meeting's coming up, right? I need to be prepared. I always call it my communication tool belt. You know, like you would, like say you're building a fence at your house, you get your tool belt on, you need some hammers, and you need a nail, and you need a leveler, and you need your lumber, you need some concrete, and all that sort of stuff. You're prepared for the task at hand. And so communication-wise, I'd say, okay, we need to have a good attitude in our tool belt. We need to have our listening ears on for meetings. And so that's sort of the idea going on here. Be prepared beforehand to be ready for when those opportunities come. Now, if you remember, last week and the week before, I talked about having this yes mentality, right? This is totally in line with that idea. Gideon's having these little yeses along the way. I'm going to say yes to these little things. I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to keep doing what you say. And now look at where we are. We're about to defeat, by the time we get done here today, we're on the precipice of defeating 135,000 people. Why? Because he said yes to all the little things along the way. He had prepared himself to use his identity and to complete God's purpose. I think that's pretty cool there, right? When the time was right, Gideon had to be ready and willing to bring out the meal and give it to the angel. Preparation was part of it, but then actually giving it was the completing of it, right? So here's our point in all this, all right? Prepared gifts cannot serve their purpose if they're kept in hiding. They need to be brought out and be presented to be used. Some people have done the diligent work of preparing their gifts, but out of fear, they never give the gift. And so they're left holding this awesome, incredible gift, and they don't ever use it. I remember for many years, I was kind of a volunteer getter at church, and I kept going to these people, these men, and asking them to serve, and they're like, no. They can make millions of dollars for their businesses, but they can't serve at church, and it just baffled my mind. God's given you these gifts. Use them, right? Use them. So let me ask you a question, all right? Which is hardest for you? Having the patience to faithfully prepare your gift, or having the courage to present your gift to God? You know, Gideon probably had some expectations after going to all this trouble of preparing such a meal. But you notice the angel doesn't dive into the meal as you might have suspected. Instead, he chooses another, perhaps strange way of accepting this gift. Verse 20 says, he told Gideon to take the meat and the unleavened cakes and put them on this rock and pour the broth over them. The angel told Gideon to release the very thing he had so painstakingly prepared, to put it down and to pour it out. And I love verse 20 says, and he did. This is the yes mentality that we've kind of been talking about. And he did it. He let it go. He released it. He gave. He worked it, right? Gave it to God. Releasing our gifts back to the Lord for Him to do as He pleases can be sometimes difficult and extremely humbling, especially when maybe we've got some secret desires of what we think God might have in mind for it. And so when we present our gifts to God and it becomes clear that He intends for us to use it in some other way or to put it down and pour it out, sometimes we can become a little frustrated, right? That's because even without knowing it, we might have placed a demand on God's gift. God, I'll do this if you do that, right? God never agrees to our crazy negotiation tactics. And so maybe we can become a little confused by what's going on. From Gideon's story right here, we learn this big important lesson, all right, gang? The best use of our gifts is seldom what we imagined. But if we'll put them down and pour them out, we'll be surprised at God's unconventional way of using them. When Gideon obeyed God's command, his gift was met with a stunning divine display. Check this out. An average rock was turned into an altar. And altars signify a sacrifice. Look at verse 21. Then the angel of the Lord reached out the tip of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened cakes, and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. And with that, Gideon's gift became a sacrifice. Our passions become a sacrifice. Our talents become a sacrifice, right? An aroma of worship sweeter to God than anything we could have ever hoped to produce. Had Gideon's gift gone as he hoped, it might have been tasty, but it wouldn't have been a sacrifice to God. I don't know if you picked up on this on our three spotlighted scriptures just a moment ago, But the first two instances of confirmation were started by Gideon, right? He said, hey, if you're telling me the truth, let's do this fleece thing, let's do this meat thing. But the third one in chapter 7, starting in verse 10, was actually initiated by God, right? Here he provides Gideon with someone to lean on, someone who's got his back, and someone who can remind him of God's confirmation. You know, not much is said about Pur in the Bible. It's just all right here, really. Verse 10 tells us that he was Gideon's servant. He was his armor bearer. He'd run into battle with him. Some people think that he might have been one of the 10 guys who he took way back in his hometown who went in at night and tore down all those Baal altars. All right? So here's the scene. All right? Earlier that day, Gideon's army's been dwindled down to 300 soldiers. Any confidence that the whole fleece thing brought him have evaporated. And so he took up God's offer for yet another bit of confirmation. Look at verse 11. Then he went down with Pur, his servant, to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. You know, sometimes another person's confidence is all you need to continue your mission, right? A friend's encouragement can keep you in the game without you thinking that, oh man, I think I better step out. I better just forfeit, right? But what happens next is just way incredible, right? Gideon and Pur sneak down to the camp. They hide right next to a tent. One of the soldiers in the tent is telling another soldier about a dream he had about this barley loaf of bread comes rolling down the hill into the camp, wipes out the camp. The other soldier says, yeah, and I heard that was Gideon and the fact that God has given the camp into his hands, right? That's pretty incredible. Right? If you notice in verse 13, these three words, when Gideon came, you might almost could put in parentheses next to that, into the camp, right? Those three words mean a whole lot. There's a whole lot not talked about right there. The probability that they could creep into the camp unnoticed and then happen upon the exact tent where these men are talking out loud about Gideon is absolutely crazy, right? So imagine how surprised Gideon would have been to hear his name, his father's name, come out of the mouth of a Midianite soldier. Stranger, right? How could they have possibly known him enough to have any kind of opinion about his ability as a military leader? You see, God had clearly already begun to intervene by spreading terror over the enemy camp to prepare for that night's ambush. Gideon and his men were being set free from fear while the enemy were being paralyzed by it. You know, this dream, in this dream he mentions this little barley loaf. This bread was the bread of the poor. It had become the main meal of the oppressed Israelites who had fallen to this yearly pillaging of the Midianites. You notice in the dream it says that the bread came down, tumbled into the tent, and flattened the tent. Not a tent, but the tent. There's a lot of symbolism in that "the" there. The main tent, symbolizing the whole camp. Right? The ESV goes on to say that the camp was turned upside down, and I really like this. I'm a very visual person, so I see this. It's obvious here, 135,000 versus 300. These guys are just going to smash Gideon, right? But things are turned upside down, and Gideon's 300 are in turn going to defeat the 135,000. You ever think about all that goes into praying a prayer? We pray this for this one thing, and yet sometimes it takes God moving 17 other things just to get to your one need, and sometimes that takes time. You know, God has given you purpose and identity, and He is moving things. He's actively moving things in our life around us so that we can fulfill the needs all the needs that need to be done. So here's my challenge to you tonight. Let's take a second look at what's happening during our day. These may be the moments that God has set up for us to use our talents, to share His story, and to share His love. So let's take advantage of where we are just today, and let's decide to make it a better place. All right, gang, thanks. That's our study for tonight. Happy holidays to you. Be careful out there, and we'll see you next week.